All right. Let me know when you guys can hear me, both in these Moore's Law is Dead Discord, which of course you get access to if you just join us at the $2 tier or higher on Patreon. And then, of course, in the live chat, let me know if you can hear me all right as well. And then we will get started as usual. March 2024. Get ready to write all my timestamps. All right. Well, here we go. Everyone says they can hear me. This is the end of March Loose Ends live stream. It's called Loose Ends because this is where I tie up any remaining connections. And you can ask me absolutely anything. I usually start by going through a couple of new leaks that I just didn't have time to get into any podcasts or videos before the end of the month. And then I go through Patreon questions back and forth with ones that were pre-prepared, again, that you could submit if you join the Patreon, and with live chat questions. So if you have a question, put it in the live chat, especially in the beginning. I would recommend having some sort of small tip on it so that I notice it and get through it. And then if there's time at the end, I just answer any random question that's on the Discord or in the live chat. So put those tipped questions in now, though, as I will categorize them and put them in order as I'm going, because eventually my voice just dies and then I stop about an hour and a half in. So even if I don't answer it right away, I will get to it eventually. But first, let's actually get to the one thing that it's not entirely new, but it is a leak. Let me write down a timestamp here. Arrow Lake release date. Because I, of course, this channel, I guess let me change the background, which many of you might notice that the background has gotten an upgrade. I've finally gotten around to assembling a pile of boxes that have been sitting here for like 2 months. But yeah, anyways, let me get to it. So there's been a ton of speculation and leaks about Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake over the past couple of weeks. I mean, I leaked pictures of a 24 core Arrow Lake sample. I saw that Igor's Labs today or yesterday just leaked a new picture of Intel Lunar Lake. And so I thought, why not give you guys a few updates here? It's not entirely new, but I have had a new source reach out to me, or I shouldn't say new, an additional source separate from the ones I used for other leaks recently. An additional source reach out to me with a roadmap that showed that the Arrow Lakes in the roadmaps that Intel is sharing about Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake are themselves conflicting, which I guess out of Intel probably doesn't surprise a lot of people. But you'll have one presentation from Intel where there will be something that says Intel Arrow Lake launching 2024, and they'll show a roadmap where it almost looks like Arrow Lake's like block starts in the beginning of 2025. Same goes for Lunar Lake. Basically, I've been told like which models of Lunar Lake will be launching. Some of them aren't launching until the beginning of Q2. And so I don't think there's any way around it. Intel's going to try to paper launch both Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake this year. But I would not expect good availability, especially not outside of maybe a couple of key, maybe they'll launch one Core 9. I don't even think they'll call it i9 anymore, right? Like one Core 9, and that'll have some availability. But like for the most part, the lineup really isn't seemingly going to be out until Q1 of next year. And in fact, a lot of the models don't even seem like they'll be ready until Q2 of next year. In addition to that, I have another document I've seen that says that Arrow Lake has between 10 to 20 tops. That lines up with other leaks I've put out that Arrow Lake is being communicated as having 13 tops. And so what we're looking at here is a situation where AMD is going to launch Zen 5, and from everything I'm still hearing, it seems like a Q3 launch to me. And it's going to be a full launch. It's going to have good volume. It's going to keep rolling out. And then it's going to be a lot of presentations and hype. And then Arrow Lake's going to kind of limp out at the end of 2024 next to Lunar Lake without real availability until the beginning of next year, meaning Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake effectively aren't launching until half a year after Zen 5. And Arrow Lake has a lot less tops than at least basically all. I mean, yeah, it'll have less tops probably than Hawk Point. So less tops than the predominant APUs AMD will be selling from Strix, Kraken, Strix Halo. All of those are going to have around 50 tops, whereas Arrow Lake's going to have 13 tops. And I think, the announcement finally that Microsoft is requiring 40 tops in an NPU for running Copilot locally. I think people have got to think about this, right? If you're AMD on laptop, Strix has over 40 tops, Strix Halo has over 40 tops, Kraken will have over 40 tops, and even Hawk Points has 16 tops. Like, and then AMD has been selling Phoenix with at least 10 tops in the NPU, which is about the same as Meteor Lake, since, I mean, a year ago. So if you think about that, AMD has this whole lineup. All of them have had AI engines for years, and at least half of the lineup has Copilot support locally. Meanwhile, Intel is planning to still sell Raptor Lake Refresh well into next year with Arrow Lake and Meteor Lake that don't have the required tops number, and only Lunar Lake does. I think that's just so important to emphasize on why that could be an issue for Intel, because it's not, yes, they'll say Lunar Lake has like a similar number to Strix and Strix Halo and Kraken, but Lunar Lake is going to be the minority of the CPUs Intel is shipping. It's just one part of the lineup, and AMD has most of the lineup with enough to run Copilot, and they've had AI engines longer than Intel. So, yep, that is basically the kind of new Arrow Lake, Lunar Lake leak. I continue to have documentation and roadmaps provided suggesting that we will be lucky to see Arrow Lake launch even early Q4, let alone the end of Q4, and continue to be told that Arrow Lake has a really anemic AI engine compared to AMD, and AMD is going to be launching before Arrow Lake. So that's the kind of newish information out there that I wanted to say. Besides that, let me put down a new timestamp here. Remember to hit the like button, everybody. We're already almost up to 600 people watching. Hit that like button. But I want to pivot over to Nvidia, because this isn't like a whole lot of new information, right? It's just I keep thinking about like how Nvidia is going to segment the memory capacity of their Blackwell products, because GDDR7 is going to bring faster speeds right away in about, I don't know, 6 months from now, but it does not seem like the higher capacity amounts are going to be ready anytime soon. And I cannot help but wonder. I mean, I'll even check right now to see if anyone else has messaged me, because I did put out some feelers to see if I could get some input on like what Nvidia is planning to do here. Let me see. Yeah, no, I still haven't gotten any feedback on that. So I can't help but think that Nvidia might just launch like the 5090 for barely more than the 4090 was, or at least $2,000 or lower, and then just call it a day, wait for higher capacities, launch their mobile lineup, like, right, launch the 5090 at the end of this year, launch mobile Blackwell early next year, and then kind of wait for GDDR7 to have high availability of higher capacities, because otherwise, I don't see how this lineup really works. You know what I mean? Or like why they would want to launch more than that anyways. The only other thing I can think of, and remember, if they launch higher capacity GDDR7 for the top die, they can just call that the 5090 Ti later, right? So that is kind of what I'm leaning towards. And it's something that I think a lot of people need to think about. Maybe they'll have 36 gigabytes ready to go for the 5090 at launch. But if they do, then part of me wonders, well, okay, if they give the 5090 36 gigabytes, is that just going to be bought up by people for AI usage anyways? So wouldn't they just charge like $2,500 for it anyways? And who cares if it costs that much? Like, it's not a product anyone's really going to buy outside of professionals and not gamers. So, and something to think about. The one thing that I wonder, and the thing I don't know, is like how dependent on memory bandwidth Blackwell is to get to the performance it wants to get to. But you have to wonder if they would even nerf it to like a 320-bit bus. Like, the full die obviously is 384-bit. But I'm starting to wonder if Nvidia would like nerf it to like 320-bit and then launch like a 5080 Ti with 20 gigabytes for 1500, and then a 5090 with 30 gigabytes for 2000. That almost makes some sense to me, because they would be making the same play that they made with the 2080 and the 1080 Ti, where they gave it 11 gigabytes of RAM so that any app that was built to use 12 gigabytes professionally had issues, and they try to push you to buy the professional version. I can't help but wonder if 30 gigabytes is that level that is just below where AI people would want it, because 36 would be more than enough for some of them. 30 gigabytes would be right at that level where they'd probably still buy the professional card if their business depended on it. But I think that's food for thought. I think that's stuff that people need to think about right now because and I don't think Nvidia's made the decision yet. So this is all just speculation, but I just wanted to have a section in here at the beginning about that because from what I'm hearing, a lot of changes have been made to like what Nvidia is going to do with Blackwell, how they're going to segment it. Even, the fact, I mean, for example, B100 used 3 nanometer as of 6 months ago. Like documentation's showing it. What that tells you is Nvidia has moved a lot of things around with Blackwell to just get it out sooner, milk the AI market sooner, and then bring out Rubin on 3 nanometer, maybe giving all 3 nanometer capacity to Rubin. So there's a lot of changes going on right now, and it's definitely going to be something to watch on that. But all right, let me now, before I continue to the questions, do the ad because, well, as you can guess, this live stream is brought to you by Micro Center. Guys, if you want to buy an RTX Super GPU, a 7900 GRE, or of course something like a 7600 XT or 3060, Micro Center is the best place to do it. It's even worth driving a couple hours if you can to get there. They have the best prices. They offer insane add-on deals like $25 off any build you submit with a picture, and that stacks on top of other deals like giving away 32 gigabytes of RAM with a discounted 7800 X3D. I mean, it's an incredible place, and this is a great time to build right now. I cannot reiterate this enough. I'm excited for Zen 5, but if you can get a 7800 X3D for like 350 or whatever it is with 32 gigabytes of RAM, I don't think you're going to get a better price performance deal on any Zen 5 product for a year like that. Because yeah, they'll be like 20% better, but if it's the X3D version, but will it come with 32 gigabytes of RAM and be the same price? No. So you'll be paying more for more, and it won't be as good price performance. Now is a good time to build. Go to Micro Center, and actually, they've got a new store in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you visit it, even if you've shopped at a Micro Center before, you'll get a free 128 gigabyte flash drive. In addition to that, this is Monitor Madness month. I've seen a lot of deals there. They have a high refresh rate Samsung OLED monitor for under $1,000. Almost everything's 10% off. So it's also a great time to buy a new monitor as well at Micro Center. But yep, I want to thank Micro Center for sponsoring me. Remember, all those links in the description, just clicking on them helps the channel. Even if you don't want to buy something, click on those links and check them out. That tells you that my fans, support people that support the channel. And of course, if you're looking to do a new build, go to Micro Center through those links. That also helps the channel even more. All right. That was the sponsor part. Let me see. I know that I already have some tipped questions. I don't want to miss them. Superman writes in. He says, "Hello, good sir. I would ask a question, but everything in the title looks good already." Well, thank you for the tip. Let me scroll down to another one here. Oh, yeah, there's several questions already. And there's a GPU one. So I'll get to the one for GPU first, and then I will get to the tipped CPU question later. So let me write down a timestamp for this one here. We got 13 minutes and 12 seconds. Can AMD compete with Rubin and other AI accelerators from Nvidia? What are the expected performance improvements for MI400? Well, at least I don't have handy next to me like anything that I've been told about MI400, so I'm not going to try to remember it off the top of my head or like scramble to look at things. But I mean, this is such a dumb answer. It sounds like, but the answer is that MI400 is going to be designed to be competitive with Rubin. That is what AMD is going to do. And if it requires them adjusting things, I think they're just going to spend the money to do it. Like these companies, if they're willing to spend the money, can move some things around. And so, yeah, I mean, that's really the answer. So, and that was really my point in my recent video where I talked about Vera Rubin. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, all of these AI chips are going to have really big numbers. I'm not really curious about if AMD can be competitive. MI300 is competitive with Hopper. It's in many ways better than Hopper. That's not my concern. AMD is smart people. They can make bigger numbers every generation. My concern is if it will come out on time, right? Because MI300 should have been out in full force half a year ago to really hit the market perfectly. I think it's going to sell well this summer. I just got some more feedback from some people saying, hey, don't be too negative on AMD. MI300 is going to sell every single one they can make. It's just, can they make enough, and can they ship enough this summer? So I think MI300 is going to do well this summer, but AMD really should have had about a year of those sales before Blackwell, and Nvidia knows that. And that's why Nvidia is accelerating the release of Blackwell AI products, and they're accelerating the release of Rubin. So can MI400 compete with Vera Rubin in performance? Probably. I don't doubt that. Can it launch on time? That's what I want to know, because that's where I have my doubts. Because I think Nvidia is going to try to launch. Honestly, I think they're going to try to launch like B100 like quarter 3 if they can pull it off, and then they're going to try to get Vera Rubin out quarter 2 of next year, and like launching 3 quarters later. And AMD's got to have MI400 out, ideally quarter 1. And I hear they're trying to do that, but that's the question. I'm not worried about performance. I'm worried about if AMD can keep pace with Nvidia's just ridiculous, relentless cycle here. Let me see. So I got another tipped question here about CPU. So let me continue the GPU questions here. So that's MI400X versus Rubin. All right, now let me put down a new timestamp for this one. Again, please hit the like button. I almost got 1,000 people watching. Let's get to 1,000 likes. James Railden writes in from the Patreon. He says, I've heard so much speculation that I've completely lost the plot. For us AI hobbyists, what's our current best guess for the amount of VRAM at the highest end of the market generation in consumer GPUs? Will we see 32, 36, or 48 gigabytes from AMD or Nvidia? I mean, I'm just calling it now. I don't think AMD is going to give 48 gigabytes to the 5090. Maybe 5090 Ti, but I just doubt it. But if they give 48 gigabytes to the 5090 Ti, they're going to charge $3,000 or $4,000 for it, I think, unless the AI market collapses. So, I think what we should be hoping for is 36 gigabytes for some top NVIDIA card by the end of next year. But I just don't really see them pushing it higher than that right now, because they know if they give more than 30 gigabytes to the 5090 or 5090 Ti or Titan, whatever they call it, that that's going to be sold to AI people anyways. And so if it's going to be, or bought up by AI people anyways, and so if it is, then they'll charge $2,500 or $3,000. I don't know if gamers are really excited about a new $3,000 card. It doesn't matter. It could be 3 times stronger than the 4090. I don't think most people are going to buy a $3,000 graphics card unless they're using it for AI. So from that perspective, I expect NVIDIA to maybe go with 36 gigabytes for the 5090, and we'll be lucky if it's above 30 gigabytes. And I think there's a real chance and I don't think they made the decision yet, but I think there's a chance they go with 24 gigabytes again, but charge like 1,700 so they can argue they didn't really increase the price much. All right, let's see here. Ken Coro writes in and he says, "Hi Tom, do you have any updates?" Let me write down this timestamp here. Do you have any updates on RDNA 3.5? How is it going to perform like compared to RDNA 3 and 4? Are there any features to look out for? I wish you a nice evening. Well, thank you, King Koro. I wish you a nice evening as well. Basically what I've heard is much higher clocks. Like they mostly fixed the clock speeds and improved efficiency with RDNA 3.5, but I don't think it gets the full ray tracing uplift that RDNA 4 gets, which if you think about it logically, that makes sense, right? If you were going to have an in-between architecture for RDNA 3 and RDNA 4, you would think RDNA 3 would have some ray tracing per raster improvements, but that would be like the main focus. The main focus would just be like, while you're working on 4, what things can we port to an in-between architecture before 4 is ready? And doubling down on ray tracing early uses up a lot of die space, which wastes space on an APU, which is what they're using RDNA 3.5 predominantly for, if not exclusively for. So yeah, expect higher clocks with RDNA 3.5. Expect it to be a bit more efficient at the same clock speeds. Expect it to have better ray tracing per CU than RDNA 3. But don't expect it to be like what we've heard about of the PS5 Pro, where it's like a radically higher ray tracing performance level. That's not 3.5 to my knowledge. Good question, though. Marijan Dabolar writes in and he says, last Broken Silicon, you guys talked about DLSS frame gen. I found that in Horizon Forbidden West, the frame gen actually improved the overall experience and stability and fluidity and didn't negatively affect the input lag from what I could notice. I mean, it had to have literally affected it unless you weren't able to hit the max frame rate anyways. The game has some weird issues of frame delivery or mouse movement, and DLSS frame gen fix that for me. I would like to add that I'm pretty sensitive to latency and still drive a TN panel because of it. This experience is on a 4070 Ti Super. I mean, here's what I'll say about frame gen. Um, like I tried it in Harry Potter or in Hogwarts Legacy a few months ago, or a little more than a few months ago. Actually, at this point, it may have been about half a year ago on my 4090, and I was actually surprised at how few artifacts there were and how decent it looked. Like, I was honestly kind of impressed. Now, that's not to say that I thought it was great. I was impressed because I had no expectations of this technology, you know, and but besides that, I just, thought instead of playing Hogwarts Legacy maxed out, assuming you're using it because you want to max it out with full ray tracing, which I did on the 4090. Yeah, I could do that in 4K with ray tracing cranked up with frame gen locked to a 120 hertz display. But I would rather just turn DLSS quality down to DLSS balanced and get, or I think it may have been like even performance to get to 120 because, yeah, I mean, I guess DLSS with frame gen quality mode looks better if you're not moving than DLSS performance mode in 4K without frame gen, but both of them can max out my monitor, and the image quality hit was worth it to have better input lag and to have less random artifacts that pop up. Again, I was impressed at how rare the artifacts were. I do think I was in a scene that benefited DLSS frame gen. Like, I was in like the bank area, or like it's like, so this is like a static background where this is really the best case scenario for like not noticing artifacts from frame gen. But I still chose to just lower DLSS quality settings to get to the maxed out frame rate of the monitor anyway. So that is what I think about it, and I think I've talked to Tim about this, of course, in a recent podcast at Hardware and Box. I've talked to this with him offline a bit ago, and we seem to be fully in agreement on that point. Is like just lower a couple settings; they will be less noticeable than the input lag. Just lower some settings to get to the higher frame rate, right? But we also both conceded that a lot of people seem to like frame gen. So maybe we're in the minority. Maybe we're just hardcore when it comes to latency. You say you are Marjan, but I don't know what to tell you. Like, you are cutting down your input, or increasing your input lag substantially anytime you use it. So you can say you didn't notice it. I would then, no offense, you are not as sensitive as you think you are if you didn't notice. Like, you're not, because it's a fact, right? Like, it is a fact that you massively increased your input lag. And if you said you couldn't notice it, then you are not sensitive to it by definition. So I just think a lot of people probably aren't as sensitive to the actual input lag itself as they think they are. And the fluidity on screen is more of it for them. But we're all different. Some people, like, it's like color blindness is a spectrum. Some people can see the differences between colors better than others. Like, women tend to have better color vision on average than men. And it's not as simple as saying one person's colorblind or not. There's a spectrum of color blindness. I'm sure the same is true of input lag. Like, there's a spectrum of what you notice and the types of input lag and fluidity you notice more than other things. So, like, that's what I would say is, if it works for you, it's a good option. It makes sense why Nvidia is making this. It makes sense why AMD has frame generation. But my opinion is that it's almost always better to turn down some settings to use it. That is just honest to God my opinion, from what I felt using it. All right, Chris Rich writes in, and he says, for games that have started development in the last year or two, do you guys have any idea if developers are putting in support for DLSS and FSR? Let me put a timestamp for this. I actually have a lot of FSR DLSS questions, and I do see all the tipped questions. I'm going to get to them. I'm just want to get through these kind of more GPU centric things first. But the reason I'm pausing here is I actually did reach out to a developer about this, Brian Heemskirk, who got back to me. Let me see here. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so he says that a lot more developers are putting in DLSS and FSR2 early. They tend to put in DLSS first if it's a PC centric game, and if it's console focused, it tends to, or they're thinking about console market share more or sales there more. They tend to put in FSR2 before they worry about DLSS. However, this is interesting. Brian says if you implement DLSS or FSR early, it can break again every time they update their engine. They have to, so that adds a new layer of Q&A every time they update their engine. And Yeah, so he says devs are just doing whatever makes sense for them. For some developers, it makes sense to put it in early, but for a lot of them, they're still putting in DLSS and FSR at the end because they want it to be like if they're starting right. The games take like 5 years to make. So if you put in DLSS early and then worry about it early, that means that by the time the game's about to come out, you might be on a whole new like you might have started the game in development with DLSS 2.2 and DLSS 4 is out by the time that the game launches. So basically what Brian's telling me is for a lot of developers, there's no point in putting it in early, Chris Rich, because despite what armchair experts say online, every fucking developer I talk to says that DLSS is not as simple as flipping a switch. And any of these armchair experts that say it is should go start their own studio because apparently they know more than people like. I mean, at every studio. I'm not gonna start listing them off because they don't want to like give away where some of my sources are. But you've seen who's been on the podcast, so I at least talk to those people sometimes. Of course, every developer tells me that there have been broken things from adding DLSS, like water disappears, rampant artifacts with the sun. And so apparently, and this is an interesting thought here, putting in DLSS early just means they may update the SDK before launch. Then you have to do a whole round of Q&A again. So yeah, some developers are doing it, putting it in early, but other developers think it's actually easier to put it in later for those reasons, which is interesting. That's a really good question, Chris. I'm glad I reached out to someone about that. So actually, speaking of developers, let me just jump in here too. Dead Eyes writes in and he says, why is anisotropic filtering always set so low on console? I love this question because I noticed it as well. There's a lot of games where you like go on Digital Foundry and they'll say for some reason the anisotropic filtering is like ×4 on these consoles. We don't know why. He says, why is it always so low on console? Presumably it has a performance trade-off that's not worth turning it up. But on PC, it's practically a free trade-off. It makes a huge difference in visual quality. With the newest consoles being so similar to PC architecture, why don't we see better texture filtering? No, I don't think the performance hit to PS5 or Series X is any bigger than it is on PC anymore. I think it was during the 360 and the PlayStation 3 era, like anisotropic filtering did a more of a performance hit for their ancient architectures. But no, I don't think there's a huge hit, here any higher than PC, that is. And the answer I basically got is, I don't know. Like, I think I'll get more feedback soon on this because I like asked this question like 30 minutes before I started the live stream. But no, it is not because there's some big trade-off usually. It's just I actually don't have a good answer. Like, in fact, some developers, because you remember, you work at a studio, you might be working on one part of a game. You're not the person who decided which settings they're going to crank up in the final build. So they might not know why they went with some texture level or whatever. But a lot of at least a couple people I talked to today seem to go, yeah, I don't know. Actually, it doesn't really make sense why that happens all the time. So that'd be a fun answer for you there. Let me put this FSR, DLSS, PSR. That's what we'll call this timestamp. Deadeyes writes in and he says, you touched on this a bit, but how closely related do you think PSSR and FSR 3.1 are? Do you think there are shared advancements between the two, or are they likely fully separate projects? Does FSR 3.1 give you more hope for the future of its competitiveness with DLSS? Well, so I'll answer the last question first. Yes. It's just funny. Like, the timing of me and Tim basically ranting about where the hell is a new version of FSR when Nvidia is iterating on DLSS, and lo and behold, a week later, AMD releases a new one. So clearly, AMD was working on that on the side, and that ameliorated my fears a little bit, but only a little bit. I still think AMD needs to prove that they're not just going to launch FSR 3.1 and then have that team work on something else and then not update it for another year. This needs to be constant updates because DLSS is a real feature that they need to take more seriously, in my opinion. So yeah, it gives me more hope. I'm still not entirely sure that they're putting the effort in that I think they should. Now, your question about PSSR versus FSR 3.1. Yeah, I'm sure they share some things. Why would they not? FSR is an open, project. But my understanding is that PSSR is just its own thing, though. That like it's it's almost it almost to me sounds like, yeah, I'm sure they were influenced by some of the recent versions of FSR when they made PSSR. But actually what I was basically told is that Sony finished PSSR and then sent it to AMD, not the other way around. So I don't know how much AMD is ready to use that, because Sony has the luxury of not worrying about PSSR being open, of not worrying about if it's good on this or that architecture or with this bus, or it needs this much tops performance. They know the PS5 Pro has this many tops, this hardware, and they can just optimize their upscaler to be really good on that. You know, like I think Digital Foundry tried to simulate the Switch 2, and I'm sure Nintendo and Nvidia will find a way to have good DLSS on the Switch 2. They'll find a way to do it. But at least if you just, without optimizing, apparently, underclock an RTX 2050 and try to run DLSS, it doesn't really have enough tensor performance to actually get the benefit you'd want using DLSS. Like the tensor cores are too slow at a certain point. So that's not something Sony has to worry about. Like, is this you know, the right balance to scale across 100 different graphics cards? They can just say it's meant for this, and that's what it does. My understanding is this isn't just a fork of FSR. Sony came up with their own version of it. And that's why I'm excited to see this, because this is like, oh, this is a new conversation entering the chat. We can now see what happens if another company tries to make their own upscaler that uses AI hardware to accelerate it, that just isn't FSR or DLSS, influenced by them, maybe using parts of FSR, I would assume, but it is apparently its own thing. It's not just like a fork that they added one thing to, from my understanding. Um, Ooh, that one guy writes in and says, "Hi, Tom. I'd like to know what the reason for developing PSSR was, or put differently, what does it do better than FSR? Image quality, performance, or a combination of both?" In fact, we're talking about PSSR so much. Let me just put down like a timestamp for that itself. All right. So well, let's answer that question. This is something that I've talked about on Broken Silicon. Maybe I didn't do a good job, or you missed that Broken Silicon. Ooh, that one guy. But what my understanding is that the reason, and I think a lot of this is actually informed by what Tim said too on the last Broken Silicon. So check that out if you haven't listened to that. But if you think about it, if you're I'm sorry, if you're Sony and you know the Switch 2 is going to have DLSS, and you know that on PC, Nvidia is marketing DLSS all the time, and there may be other upscalers like Epic's making their own and all of that. Like, if you're Sony, you're probably really excited when AMD announced FSR and then FSR 2, because you're like, oh great, we can just use this on console now and get kind of run things in 4K upscaled. This is perfect for consoles with limited hardware capabilities, or limited, it's all relative. But like, this is exactly what we would want in a console. But then you maybe, if you're Sony, you sat there and you watched DLSS go from 2 to 2.2 to 3 to 3.5, and then you watched FSR go to 2 to 2 to 2 to 2 to fucking 2. And if you're Sony, that probably piss you off. You're like, here's Nvidia that we cannot use DLSS with, iterating all this time. AMD has FSR 1 year later, right, or something, or 2, like pretty quickly FSR 2, and then nothing and nothing and nothing and nothing and no updates until 3.1 like a week ago. If you're Sony, you're like, we don't want to be beholden to if AMD is going to get around to updating this. We want our own solution. So to answer your question, like, what is the reason for developing PSSR? It's about control, and it's about insurance. It's about knowing that, if FSR 4 comes out and it's great, Sony won't be mad. Great. There's a new version of FSR. Developers, use it if you want to. Use Epic's new thing. Use this new thing. Do that. We don't care what developers use. If it's what they think is best for their game, they can use it. But what we don't want, if you're like, I'm speaking to Sony, what we don't want is for developers to feel like they have to use an inferior technology because AMD's dragging their ass making a new version, where DLSS is over here even on the Switch too. If you're Sony, you're like, if you make a PlayStation game, PSSR works, use it, baby. And then they can market it against Xbox. Or Xbox may be sitting there, although there's rumors Microsoft's working on their own upscaler for Windows, which is interesting. But if you're Sony, you can say, at a minimum, we know that we have something that we think is competitive with DLSS, even if AMD is not competitive this year. We made it, we update it, we control it. It's at least meeting our minimum standard. And that's what it's all about. And it's all influenced by the specs Sony chose for the PS5 Pro, where they can go, if you're a developer, we built this around 300 tops, this matrix hardware, and it is going to be hardware accelerated by this, tailored to this device. And that's the idea. And I don't think they're done. I think they're going to keep updating PSSR. I think the PlayStation 6 will use it. I just think it's insurance and control. It's always there as an option if you're a developer to make your game look as good as possible. And it's not on Microsoft's console. So this is a real marketing point where they're maybe using FSR. You're using something competitive with DLSS, and you never have to worry about if it's going to get updated. It's owned by Sony. It's always going to get updated. So that is the point of it. Let's see what we got here. Let's see. Let me round out the rest of these console questions, and then we'll move to the CPU ones. Again, I'll get to Mike Sullivan's question in a second here. So let me write down a new timestamp here. PS5 Pro Specs. All righty. Kenoon25 writes in and says, "Hey Tom, what is with the pessimism around the PS5 Pro leaks? I understand some people would want it to have Zen 3 or Zen 4, but with a faster clock CPU and the new PSSR software, 90% of games should be able to run at 4K 60 with minor ray tracing or 1440p 120 without it. That is around the performance of a mid-range gaming PC. That is more than enough performance nowadays. It almost feels like people, for some reason, expected the PS5 Pro to have a 4090 and a 7950X and a $500 box. Please make sense of these complaints, please." Yeah, it's just ignorance. I don't know where this always happens or why people have it. Like, when did the PS4 Pro? Yeah, so right, because so that wouldn't apply. But I remember when the Xbox One X came out, for example, to use an Xbox example, and there were people like, well, why doesn't the Xbox One use Zen? And it's like, because the base Xbox doesn't use Zen, and so they're not going to put all this effort into a radically different CPU for this console. And that double applies to Sony because they don't use DirectX. Like, their version of Zen 2 in the PlayStation 5 is a bespoke version of it. This is not I think it was, I think I remember now. I think it was go look it up. I think Chips and Cheese did an analysis of the PS5 CPU and found that it was the same performance as the 3800X will be. And I think I might be misremembering the exact number. I think it was it saved 30% on die space while having the same performance as a 3800X. Think about that. That is not the standard Zen 2. And Sony programs things to the metal. I've seen armchair experts say that's not true. It is. I asked a couple developers about it. I'm like, if they change to Zen 3, could that break compatibility with a couple games? And they said yes. Would it do it for all games? No, most probably not. But that's not something Sony wants to worry about. If they're moving to 4 nanometer with the PS5 Pro, which I believe they are, then, keeping the same architecture as the PS5, but die shrinking it to 4 nanometer is going to give them a density that's close to Zen 4C anyway. So, what's the point in switching architectures? There isn't one, is the answer. If it could break backwards compatibility at all, and even more so, it's not worth the money. Each IP block in these consoles, they're spending millions, right? So, if you're Sony, you're like, yeah, of course we're going to spend the money on the GPU part. If we don't update the GPU part of this console, it's not a fucking Pro. So, of course, they're spending that money. But after that, Sony's going to sit there and go, all right, obviously we made the GPU better. Obviously. And we will find a way to make that backwards compatible. Duh. That we can't make a Pro unless we spend the money there. But do we really have to spend the money on a new CPU here or there? Or should we just die shrink this thing, make it even smaller, get even better yields, and call it a day? That's what Sony decided to do. They have their own version of Zen 2. The way it was explained to me by one person at AMD is that they stripped out some of the things that would help compute stuff, but it's because this isn't running Cinebench, this is running games. And then they also, and some of the stuff being stripped out may have been to help with heat density as well, and so it's a very evenly thermally dispersed design that takes up less space for the same gaming performance as Zen 2. They put a lot of effort into making it to the metal backwards compatible with PS4. I don't think they want to spend the money to change that. This is not the PlayStation 6. That's when they'll put in the money and take Zen 6 or Zen 7 and find a way to make it backwards compatible to the metal with Zen 2 and with, what was it, a Jaguar that was in the PS4. That's when they'll put in that money, but they just don't think it's worth the money right now. So it's ignorance. I don't know. I don't know why people expected AMD to put all this other stuff in there. If you actually look at what the performance of this is going to be, it's basically entirely in line with what the performance was of the PS5 when that came out. I mean, You know, like at the time, everyone thought the PS5 sounded crazy, but by the time it came out, we had the 3090, which is way stronger than the 2080 Ti, and it wasn't that crazy. And it's basically entirely in line with that again. All right. And again, I think they could end up selling this for $500 without a disk drive. And that's a pretty big performance uplift for something that was the minimum amount of work and requires the minimum amount of work from devs to optimize. Again, actually, that's another thing. Let me say too. Like, if they would have gone to Zen 4, they would have had all of these decisions that devs need to make. Like, all right, well, in PlayStation 5 Pro mode, we have to make sure we use this version of the SDK because we don't use this version of the SDK, it could break backwards compatibility. And then how are we going to program this game? It's so much more powerful. It's not what Sony wants. They want it to be all of these unlocked games running at 40 frames, now running at 60, games running at 90, now running at 120. And then if you optimize with PSSR and ray tracing, you can give a performance uplift to the visual quality. That's all they're trying to do while not raising the price of the PS5. All right. Soldier789 writes in and says, many news sites recently reported that the PlayStation 5 Pro is unnecessary. See, isn't this funny though now? You can see how the news cycle just changes. Like a week ago, the PS5 Pro isn't strong enough. Now all of a sudden, all the clickbait's talking about it being unnecessary. But Soldier says, considering there is no competition from Xbox, there'd be no resolution jump. Is it, well, they have PSSR, so it might feel like a resolution jump. He says, is it much more costly for Sony to make? No. And is it more about testing PSSR this generation? No, these people are just wrong. Like, everyone's entitled to their opinion, right? Some people want this, some people want that. But just because one developer wants this and another wants that does not mean one of them's right, right? They're different people with different needs and different wants. I would say that this is in the minority. Basically, every developer I've talked to is either excited for the PlayStation 5 Pro or doesn't care because it's so easy to program and it doesn't really cost more to make. Let me ask you, Soldier789, if all they're really doing is changing the silicon. Everything else is just the same amount of memory, or maybe, I don't know, Digital Foundry said they might have slightly more. I haven't even looked into that yet, but like basically the same amount of everything except for the die. So it's like another $20 in cost in silicon. Why wouldn't they do that? So they could say Grand Theft Auto 6 and everything runs best on PlayStation 5 Pro. I mean, can you imagine how funny this is going to be if this happens? Because it might. Like, Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard, and doesn't Sony's deal with Call of Duty still extend for a couple more years now? So isn't there a chance Sony's going to have Call of Duty marketing with the PS5 Pro running significantly better than on the Xbox, maybe with PSSR? What a win. What a marketing win. Like, this is worth the money for them to do this. I think everybody is thinking much too hard about like it, like this is like it costs them money, but it's not like launching. It does not cost as much as launching an entirely new console. It's very much so compatible with the way you program the PS5, so developers don't really need to learn a new thing. Like, unnecessary. Nothing's necessary. What does necessary mean? We could probably still be gaming on PS4s and, you know, Nvidia Maxwell. if I'm sure, nothing's necessary. So I don't know. I think most people I talk to, frankly, don't care about the new PS5 Pro unless they're technical nerds and then they're just curious to see how it works. No one here that I've talked to thinks that like it's bad because I don't know. Again, I think, why are all these news sites talking? Because they needed something to talk about this week. That's honestly what I think. Trevor Renfro writes in and says, is the Nintendo Switch or 2 or whatever they're going to name it likely to have HDMI 2.1, 2.0B, or another version? Also, what version exclusive features are likely to be supported? I believe they took the Lovelace out. Yeah, so I don't even remember. RTX 4090 I know it's slower than AMD. HDMI edition. Is it still 2.0 or what was it? Oh no, that's right. The 4090 has HDMI 2.1 and it's behind AMD DisplayPort. Amazing. I forgot that for a second. So my understanding is that they ported the IP block for output from Lovelace to the Switch 2. So they took the 4 nanometer IP block that's in Lovelace, ported it to 8 nanometer, and that's in the Switch 2. I didn't get this from multiple people, so I'm not 100% sure. But to answer your question, yeah, that's what I think they did. So I think whatever the output capabilities of the 4090 are, basically that's the capabilities, give or take. It's not going to have like 4 outputs though, but like it should have the latest HDMI, I believe, in the Switch 2. They did, even though they wanted to use Ampere, they did think it was worth getting that, I guess. Um, Koladik writes in and says, rumors keep circulating about a Microsoft handheld console. If they make one, how mad should we be if they don't call it the X Plank? Well, they've already named it. It's called the Microsoft Surface. Joking. It's not really a joke. I'm actually serious. That is the Microsoft handheld. If they make another handheld, I'm not saying they won't. I will be a little confused as I'm like, dude, just focus on Windows, Microsoft. You're the Windows company. But in other words, I don't really have anything to say about a Microsoft handheld. So don't clip that, edit it to make it sound like I'm saying something I'm not. I don't have anything to say about it. Although I still know the trolls will. All right, let me finally move on to some of these CPU questions, but I want to get through GPU and console first. So let me put down a new timestamp here. All right. Mike Sullivan writes in, thank you for the tip, and says, do you know anything about Ryzen XT processors coming out? I'm waiting for that 5950 XT 3D. Honestly, if they made that, I might, depending on how it's priced, I might consider getting like a higher clocked all X3D. They probably wouldn't do all X3D, would they? They just do one of the dies as X3D. Then I wouldn't bother. But if they ever did that, I'd probably buy it for the, because I still have, an AM4 motherboard. But no, I don't really know anything about it. I mean, I saw that on video cards, and Wycry said this flew under the radar, including his own radar. I I haven't, asked, been told anything about the X2 release of Zen 3. I think if anything, it's just the yields are so goddamn good now. They might as well keep releasing better and better stuff there because AM4 remains very popular. So let me just write that down as a timestamp. All right, now let me try to scroll down through the questions without YouTube deleting them because it sometimes does. All right. Lars Hansen writes in and says, hi, Tom. You've now been a full-time YouTuber for a few years. Yeah, I mean, for like 4 or 5 years now. Well, wait, full-time? Because that'd be 21, 2, 3. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I did for like half of 2020 is when I did full-time, and all of 21, 22, 23. Right. So we're halfway through the year. So yeah, I've been doing this 4 years. Full time. I did it a little before, but now it's full time. He says, if you could send a letter back in time with 3 pieces of advice to yourself just before you quit your job, what would they be? The first thing I would have told myself back then would have been don't commit and don't worry as much. I wasn't sure how things would go. It's scary. I saved up some money as long as I could before I decided I was just getting too tired, and then I said, all right, I'm going to do it. It's scary. The first thing I would do is just tell myself, calm down, you're going to do it, so don't kill yourself. Like, don't work as hard as you can to build up this platform, but don't yeah, don't kill yourself over it. You're going to do fine. So just try to get enough sleep too. So that'd be the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice I would get myself is I'm not going to name names, but I would have warned myself which YouTubers are insane, narcissistic, egotistical pieces of shit that probably have like just destructive personality disorders. So I would have warned myself about those people. Not going to say the names out loud. And then number 3 would have just been wait for the leak to be done. And I think I'm very good at that now. And I've never made anything up, but there have been times where I was like 90% ready to put the leak out by my current standards. And I was like, well, it's Friday. I've got to get this done. And I could have just waited for that one source to get back to me, which would have colored my opinion and like some of the stuff better. That's what I've just said is you don't need to get this out now. Wait a week, wait for that last few sources to get back to you, wait for the follow-up questions so you don't and do more spell checking. I mean, there were some spelling errors that were just stupid. And the first, I mean, honestly, like if it's a 30-minute video, Tom, you need to stop, come back the next day and do a full edit again because the longer the video it is, the longer it takes to check. And like, I remember there was one leak, that should have been one of my best leaks. And like, I said Murphy instead of Murphy from Intel because spell check changed the name. I didn't notice. So like stupid little mistakes like that. If I give myself advice, yeah, it would have been calm down, you're gonna do fine. I would have warned myself who the crazies are and who the nice people are too. Talk to them sooner. And then I would have said, you can wait You can wait. Doesn't need to be 4. There were some points where I did like 4 videos a week and a podcast. I don't know where I found the energy back then. I guess I was younger, but just take your time would have been the other thing. All right, that was a fun question that entirely interrupted my timestamps here. Oh, it did skip over some. God dang it. Well, I would just ask the mods if you believe I missed any. Like, I know Faceplant's here online right now, who's a mod for Moore's Law is Dead. Please, if I miss any other tipped questions, please put them in the Discord or DM me them. So, because YouTube does this thing where it like deletes them as I scroll sometimes. All right. YouTube advice will be a timestamp there. And then Spencer Walker 21 writes in and he says, I'm the Steam Deck. I'm the guy whose only PC is a Steam Deck. And I just got a 4070 Ti Super 16 gigabyte with Amazon cashback covered it. Oh, I got a Lenovo Workstation P520 with a W2145. I'm actually curious what that is. W2145 CPU. No, obviously. So that's Intel, formerly Skylake. Okay. Oh, it's an 8-core Skylake server CPU. At 4.5 gigahertz. So you got this for he got this 8-core Skylake for 150 with RAM and an SSD. Yeah, I guess that's a good deal for a budget build. And then he says, I hope that Skylake doesn't bottleneck the GPU. I mean, unfortunately, it's going to sometimes. I'm just letting you know. Like, it is worth remembering that a slower clocked Skylake is the same performance or a little worse than Zen 2. And all of these people complaining about the PlayStation 5 Pro still using Zen 2, you're using something at that same tier, my friend. And your GPU is, I mean, it's stronger than the GPU that will be in the, at least in terms of raster, that will be in the PS5 Pro. So will it bottleneck it? Yes. Is your CPU too weak to run 4K, to run 60 frames per second? No, I mean, it's fast enough for that. Half of your games will run 120. So I'd say you got a good deal. But yeah, your CPU is the bottleneck. But always remember this. There is always a bottleneck in your system. So if you got a CPU, motherboard, RAM, and SSD for $150, will that bottleneck your GPU that costs 3-4 times as much as that system put together? Yeah, it's going to bottleneck your GPU, but you only got it for 150. I mean, so now the bottleneck's that instead of this. So I'd say you got a good deal. And I'd say it probably games a lot better than your Steam Deck on your 4K monitor, which I do remember you told me you were gaming on a 4K monitor. Let me see here. The Ace will be in older games. Okay, so I got a new question here from XPod. Sorry, I just derailed my own train of thought. Do you think Nvidia Ace will be in older games? Well, now I'm going to feel stupid. Nvidia Ace. Oh, brings digital character. Oh, so that thing. Do I think Nvidia Ace will be in older games? No, not really. I don't. I don't think that this is a thing that developers are going to be desperate to add to all of their old games right away. And in fact, I think Nvidia Ace may be overhyped. Because from what I've seen so far, it kind of seems like it just comes up with conversations, but it doesn't always come up with the same ones that are consistent, which would be like the whole point of game design is to make a tailored experience. So no, I don't think they'll add it to older games. I think for sure this will be a thing. Or let me back up. Do I think some modders and some devs will add NVIDIA Ace to some older titles? Yes. I do not think every developer is going to go back and do it. I don't think it's going to be a trend. That's my prediction. So, but it's not, guaranteed. That's just what I would expect. But yes, I'm sure there will be one. So if someone wants to say I was wrong, yes, I'm sure one will do it. Let's see here. Joa Fontoro writes in, let me start switching to some more CPU questions here. So let me write down a timestamp for this. Zen 5. Joa Fontero writes in, thank you for the tip. Can we expect higher core counts in Zen 6 desktop and an okay IPC boost? Yeah, Zen 6 is going to get a good IPC boost. I mean, for what I've seen, it should be at least typical, so above 10%. Yeah. Zen 6 will have a good IPC increase, very good latency enhancements. Says I'm looking forward to more Zen 5 leaks. Frankly, guys, I think we know pretty much what we need to know about Zen 5. I mean, The only thing to know is when AMD wants to launch certain versions of it, like V-Cache, Zen 5C. Will they do it at launch? That's AMD's decision. It doesn't depend on Zen 5. It's an wholly artificial decision made by them. But otherwise, we know the performance, guys. I've leaked it. Don't believe the 50% IPC increase leaks. It's all bullshit. We know the performance. We know it's probably going to launch with 16 cores, maybe 8 plus 16. And that's a decision AMD can make a month from now. Like, it's still up to them to make this decision. So really I consider your question, is Zen 6 going to have a good IPC boost? Yes, it will have one just like Zen 5. Maybe slightly lower than Zen 5's though. Let me say this too to hedge myself a little bit. When I say IPC, just remember that's different than the multi-threading increase, right? Like the base IPC is not 50%. Now, in an AVX 512 workload tailored perfectly to Zen 5, could you see a 40% multi-threading increase? Probably, but Zen 4 did that too. Zen 4 didn't have a 40% IPC increase, but its multi-threading uplift was over 30%. So that type of thing we might see again at Zen 5, but don't expect like all single core performance to be like that high. Wooly Ram writes in and says, what are the odds you give for Nvidia charging a monthly fee to activate DLSS and ray tracing, like car companies are doing for heated seats? That's pathetic. No, I don't think so. Trying to think what they would lock away. Yeah, I don't see Nvidia doing that right now. No, I don't think so. I think they just charge more for the card itself. Low Res Gamer writes in, and he says, with Intel, Microsoft, and AMD pushing CPU-based AI processing at 40 tops baseline for consumers, what does this imply for NVIDIA's dominance of developer tools in the CUDA interface? There will be a rapid growth in small AI runtime engines that probably won't be NVIDIA compatible, thanks to NVIDIA's not allowing translation layers. Could this shift the balance of other AI tool sets for the small developers as well for consumers? Short term, no, because if you think about it, Meteor Lake just came out. It's not very popular. Phoenix has been out for a year, but it had a very primitive AI engine. Hawkpoint is just iterating on that. So, low-res gamer, when you say Intel, Microsoft, and AMD, well, first of all, it's Microsoft and AMD. Intel doesn't have shit for AI performance right now. Lunar Lake will get it early next year, and Arrow Lake won't. So, no. Like, AMD and Microsoft are the ones pushing NPUs. Don't get tricked by the marketing. When Nvidia, when Intel's latest AI engine can't even beat a 1-year-old one from AMD, and they're still not putting it in a lot of their products and NPU. So no, it's AMD and then Microsoft pushing it. And because of that, though, right? Like, if you think how many people have an Nvidia GPU and how many people are going to have Strix by the end of the year, a lot more people are going to have Nvidia GPUs. So for the next 2 years, developers are going to have to make sure their apps can run on an Nvidia graphics card. Because I mean, come on, like there's going to be people that want to have AI laptops that just use like an RTX 3050 or 4060 to do the AI work, and developers aren't going to ignore Nvidia. I don't think so. It's just your laptop will be significantly more efficient with a longer battery life if you have an MPU, because that MPU is going to run Copilot using like 1 to 10 watts, whereas that GPU might run Copilot and be consuming 50 watts. So it's about battery life for the most part there. And I don't think developers are going to ignore NVIDIA. Now, 3 years from now, if like AMD just takes the laptop market, everything has a Strix or better AI engine. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. But even then, though, they're still going to program for NVIDIA. I don't think. No, I don't think so. Sheriff Lofty writes in and says, hello, I actually have 2 questions. Before so, I want to thank you for your great content that is informative, precise, and honest. Oh, thank you. My first question is, if you think it is at all a good idea to upgrade from a 7950 X3D to whatever the top end of Zen 5 will be, I'm leaning towards waiting for Zen 6, but I would like to hear your thoughts since I believe it is of a different design. Additionally, I do a lot of rendering in Houdini and Cinema 4D. That's why I asked this question. Okay. So to answer your first question, if the 7950 X3D is doing a good job, I would just wait for Zen 6. That should come out under 2 years after Zen 5. And it's going to have massive latency improvements, possibly higher core counts. I just wait for Zen 6 if your CPU is doing the job. From what I've been told, Zen 6 is going to be compatible with AM5, so just wait for that. But again, only I know what's worth it to you for your job. You say you do a lot of work in Houdini and Cinema 4D. Well, if Zen 5 does your work 50% faster or even 20%, you could probably sell your old CPU for $400 and then get this new one for like 600 or 700. Is it worth spending $300 to make your work go 20, 30% faster? Maybe you should just upgrade every generation then. It's not really about which one it is. All right. He says, my second question is whether Nvidia will release some sort of MCM card in 2025 to compete with RDNA 5. I won't say which channel I heard this from, okay, but I'm curious to know if there has been any talk in Nvidia about such a card, or it's just channels throwing out buzzwords to get some views. I mean, I don't know if I was the first person to leak it, but I leaked like a year or two ago that Nvidia could probably do an MCM version if they want. So it's up to them. Will they? Honestly, the answer is, will RDNA 5 be very good? The problem is, if they were to do some like bigger than reticle limit gaming card, they're gonna charge like $3,000 for it. So I don't know how excited I would be, but I don't know. It just depends how good RDNA 5 is. Right now, it sounds like they're not planning an MCM card, but I think they would change their mind if they thought AMD was going to take the performance crown. Robert S. Barnes writes in, any news on Turin AI? Is there a chance it comes out in quarter 3 together with the rest of Zen 5? It doesn't seem likely to me. Let me write that down. Blackwell, and then also Turin AI for the timestamp. I don't remember when I leaked this, but it was months ago, maybe a half a year ago. From what I've heard, Turin AI is like soft canceled. It's not canceled, but like I was told it's probably only for specific customers and that it's not going to get a widespread release due to some issues, but like issues they can work around if they program for one of their best customers. That's what I'm hearing. So no, I don't think Turin. Well, then again, now that AI is the biggest buzzword, has that changed? I guess we'll see. I don't know. I guess I can't entirely rule that out now that I think about it. Like maybe they just shifted a bunch of units over to finish it because they have to be able to market Turin AI. But at least the last I heard, and this was a very long time ago, was that Turin AI is probably only going to be for specific customers. See, I guess even if they announce Turin AI, and now I guess now that I think I'm walking myself into changing my mind. I think AMD is likely to announce some kind of Turin AI product, but it's not going to be something probably super easy to just buy. Like yeah, they'll announce it for the buzzwords, which is the biggest reason you talk about AI right now, is so that you can get investors buying up your stock who don't even know what they're buying, and then it'll probably only be for some people. That'd be my suspicion. Although again, I have not asked about Turin AI for at least half a year, so just take even what I just said with a little bit of a grain of salt there. All right. Let me continue with the tipped questions. What do we got here? Answered that one. Answered this one. All right. Okay. Alex Jones writes in and he says Samsung demoed 32 gigabit DDR5 dies in September, Micron in November for 64 gigabyte and 128 gigabyte RDIMMs expectations on the timetable for availability. What was the delay for the 24 gigabit die? So I'm not. He says DDR5, so I assume that's what you're talking about. A GDDR5. I mean, basically, what I pretty much heard is just they don't have the. It takes a really, really, really expensive cutting edge machine to make some of these higher density versions of GDDR7 or even DDR5, and that would have been what the holdups are. Also, I heard Samsung had like really, really bad yields for their highest capacity and speeds of RAM they were making. Like so bad that they don't even like exist, some of the ones they've announced. So that's really the best answer I can give you right now. Naughty DJ Aftershock writes in and he asks, how do the GPU guys at Nvidia and AMD think of each other? A lot of them are usually friends. Like they live in the same part of the country. They go out and get beers after work and they love talking about tech. I actually don't know of any AMD people that have shit talked Nvidia people outside of marketing, of course, nor any AMD Nvidia people talking shit about AMD. I'd say maybe there's a bit more arrogance usually with the Nvidia people. They'll probably be the least surprising thing you've ever heard me say. But generally speaking, they respect each other's work and they find things they make interesting. I mean, you have to remember, these are people that work at these companies. They are interested in technology. And if you're someone at Nvidia who's been working on Blackwell this whole time, and then you see MI300, you're like, ooh, how does that work? Because I haven't been looking at this at work. So it's fun to look at the competitor stuff. You know, like I remember when I worked at General Motors, uh, when I was there, it was actually a business as a work day to go to the Detroit Auto Show. And I remember loving just, even though I worked at General Motors, talking with people and looking at things that like Mercedes and Ford were making. So um I won't say which companies we made fun of. There's always some, and I'm sure that's true of like AMD and Nvidia and Intel people. But for the most part, there's just respect. They're just peers that work at a different company. And a lot of these people have worked at multiple companies. I guess I would say which ones, but I have sources that were that were sources at one company, moved to another one. Our source for me there now, So I don't. Uh, they generally respect each other a lot. Um, I res- Don Draper writes in here. He says, "Be honest, Tom. You guys poked fun at Dodge. Yeah, maybe that's one of the companies we used to make fun of a lot. Let me see here. So if you want to put in those tipped questions, I'm probably going to do this in another 30 minutes. So don't hesitate. This is kind of the last um, stint here of questions. But let me switch to one from the Patreon here. Got a couple of those left. So New Kick writes in. Let me write down a timestamp for this one. New Kick writes in and says, "What do you expect from Computex this year? Do you plan to leak information on the latest display tech?" Not really display tech. I mean, I guess if I had something big to leak about it, I might, but I don't really care. Like, I know that sounds so annoying for me to say, but like, I'm interested in Zen 6 and Nova Lake and Rubin. I don't, I even talk to people sometimes at Sony, like, and Nintendo, like, that's like a lot of subjects. I mean, think of how many things I'm leaking, like 8 CPUs and GPUs from AMD, GPUs and consoles from Nvidia, GPUs from AMD and Sony, Intel CPUs and GPUs. I mean, what is that already like 10 different subjects I've got to cover? Yeah, I don't really try to find anything out about display tech. At a certain point, you just have to say, I have enough to talk about, So, no, I do not plan to leak any display tech. But what do I expect from Computex this year? I mean, I think I think you're going to see AMD announce Zen 5, and I think you're going to see them probably announce RDNA 4. It's going to be a big show, and I think Intel's going to have to demo Arrow Lake. In fact, if Intel does not demo Arrow Lake at Computex, that is like the biggest goddamn red flag I've ever seen in my life. And in fact, I'm almost surprised they didn't show off that already this year. Like, I mean, you've already got AMD admitting Strix's Zen 5 officially. You know, like Intel's basically just said Arrow Lake exists, like to this day, pretty much. Like, I don't know. I would expect Nvidia to show off Blackwell, maybe tease their next gaming lineup. We'll see. And then I would expect AMD to announce RDNA 4 and Zen 5. And then I would really hope Intel shows off Arrow Lake, because if they don't, man, I don't know. Jeff Settler writes, and he says, "I know you guys are fellow Metal Gear Solid fans. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the remake of Snake Eater. It's called Metal Gear Solid. Let's see, Gear Solid Delta. This is the official one, right? Oh no, yeah, it is. What do I think about? So when did this come out though? Metal Gear Solid Delta, and this is by. What do I think about the remake on Unreal Engine 5? I mean, I think if it looks really good, I'm super excited. Yeah, it's not out. Yeah, so this is the one that's not out yet. This isn't the horrible port. I don't know. I mean, all I can tell you is if it turns out well, I'll probably buy it because I'm just a giant Metal Gear Solid fan. Um, that's that's it. That's all I have to say. All right, let me see here. We got another tipped question from Johnny, who says it's a lot cheaper to get 12 gigabytes of VRAM and a used 3060 than moving up the stack from to a 4070. You think we might see the return of multi GPU setups for AI driven games? No, no, guys. Crossfire SLI is done. I don't think so. I guess that's an interesting thought. Like, what if you had two GPUs and you had like a 4070 running the game and a 3060 running some AI in what is it? Locally run AI engine, but I don't think so. I don't think that's going to be something like maybe one indie game would allow you to do that. I don't think that's going to become the norm. Guys, multi GPU is dead. It just is. I'm sorry. I don't see anything really making it come back. But that is an interesting idea, I guess. I just can't see a developer putting in all this effort to make that work when they know less than 0.1% of people would use that. I mean, I don't think so. I think it's far more likely. The only thing I could see a developer doing is like taking a month to add the ability to like use the integrated graphics to help accelerate like an AI model or something. Like they'd be like, hey, so if you have 64 gigabytes of RAM in your system, we will use the integrated graphics to run some tiny model. Like that's it. Well, I guess not 64 gigabytes, but you know what I mean? Like if you have the extra DDR5, like the game requires 16 gigabytes of DDR5, a 12 gigabyte GPU. And they're like, but if you have a 24 gigabytes of RAM or more in your system of DDR, we can take that 8 gigabytes and use the integrated graphics to run some model that's super, super, super weak. That is all I can see them doing. I don't see them using multiple GPUs really. Lootsalots says, is there going to be an AI mining? The emoji button is blocking your words app to use with GPUs. So there already is. There's a salad app, which I have a link to that somewhere. I should probably drop that here because that helps my channel when you do it. Let me get that here. Let's see if YouTube lets me share it. But I mean, yeah, there's something like the Salad app that uses your computing power. There's the link to it if you want to check it out there. This is the sponsored link. But yeah, I think you're going to see more and more distributed computing models that try to pay you a little bit here up here, and that includes AI uses. So yeah, that's all mining ever was, is distributed computing. It could be for Bitcoin, could be for Doge, could be for just something that's selling compute on the internet and trying to pay you for it, like the Salad app. So yeah. Moore's sincerest condolences on your law passing. I mean, it passed like decades ago in reality. So yeah. All right, so that's that. Let me check the Moore's Law is Dead Discord and see if there were any questions. Benjamin Oshley writes in and says, if Strix Halo comes up, Tom, do you think a 15-watt Halo will be worth getting over a normal Strix? No. Well, I guess let me write this down as a timestamp because this is a subject change. 15-watt Halo versus Strix. I feel like someone asked me about Zen 5 Strix Halo APUs every time we do a live stream, and then every time I pull up this, like, at this point, pretty goddamn old document to look something up. Like, if I pull this up here, and again, it's pretty outdated by now, but yeah, the lowest I am seeing them, great, it's a pop-up. The lowest I am seeing them talk about Strix Halo is 25 watts. And honestly, generally speaking, the lowest I'm seeing is 45 watts. I really think the target of Strix Halo is going to be like 65, like, yeah, around the 65 to 100 watt region. Being like Strix Halo is like having a 45 watt GPU and a 65 watt CPU. Like, I think that's kind of where, like, so between 45 and 100 watts is really going to be the sweet spot of Strix Halo. It says they have models that went, like, this is an old document, but they were working on models that went down to 25 watts. But I don't think they're going to use a lot of them. And in fact, one of the documents said that the 25 watt models had 20 compute units enabled, meaning that full Strix Halo is 40 compute units. So they were saying a 25 watt model. Also, it only had an 8-core CPU enabled. So 8-core CPU, 20 CU GPU. Strix Point has 16 CUs anyways. So if they're stopping at 25 watts, Benjamin Oshley, and that's 20 CUs, then a 15-watt model probably won't outperform Strix Halo. Strix Point by that much, at least not efficiently. So no. Now, I mean, could they make one? Maybe. And if it had the entire 256-bit LPDDR5 X bus enabled, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe because of the bigger bus, it would outperform it. But I mean, if they're talking about half of the compute units being disabled for a 25 watt model, and that's only 4 more CUs than Strix Point. I think that tells you right there that below 25 watts, they think Strix Halo is kind of pointless compared to just using Strix Point. But yeah. Let me continue the questions here. No, not I know. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions here. So let me see. I got through all of the Patreon questions. Let me do a final call for reader mails here, and otherwise I'll just start answering questions in the Discord and in the live chat here. Again, remember to click on the links for Micro Center as well and hit the like button, share it. Make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Laws YouTube channel as well, as that's something that's been driving clearly more views in the algorithm when we've been growing more in the first half of this year. So to the people that say it doesn't help to subscribe, it helps a lot to subscribe. So please subscribe to Moore's Laws to the YouTube channel. But let me see here. Tweedle writes in and says, I think Strix Halo is going into the Steam Deck too. No, there's no way. It'd be too expensive. Uses too much energy. Let's see here. Hey, Tom, what do you think ARM CPUs would be viable for in Windows, and would they be competitive with x86 in gaming? I don't expect them to be. In fact, the way Qualcomm's talked about the Snapdragon Elite already publicly seems to be one of those days. Seems to be like they're already downplaying the CPU performance of the Snapdragon Elite. Like they're like, oh, actually the GPU runs well, but most games aren't CPU bottlenecked. So they're basically just openly saying them the Snapdragon Elite CPU is like just weaker than AMD's last Gen 1. So no, I don't expect it to. I don't. Upscaling to run my games at bog standard. Seeing the idiotic specs. I don't know. Someone's arguing in the live chat there. It's funny. Benjamin Oshley says one of these days he'll get my last name right. Maybe I need a better pronunciation. I don't think I'm ever going to get it right. You say it's Oshley, maybe Oshley. Oh, Oshley. I think you just need to tell me how to say it and then hope I'll remember. But the problem is I've said your name so many times throughout the years, Ben, that I'm forgetting, I'm automatically saying it the way I've always said it. So that's kind of the issue there. Any comments on DOJ versus Apple? No, seems like they have a somewhat compelling case, but it also seems like that just in general, they're trying to make an example of these tech companies right now. Let me see. Any other questions that I'm finding interesting? I don't know. Might cut it short. Let's see. Teraflops are a meaningless performance number. All those years ago, Don. That's about 33 teraflops in an enclosed environment destroys PC in every way possible. Not really. I don't know. I'm scrolling through the live chat here, and there are definitely a lot of people arguing. A lot of fanboy arguments going on the side here that I usually miss, I suppose. Oh, man. What do you think of the current market flood of handhelds and mini PCs? I've got some behind me there. Actually, I bet I can do this. This will be fun. Watch this, everybody. If you look on the Intel shelf right there in blue, there I have a mini PC right there. And then if you look at the AMD shelf in red right there, you can see I have an AMD mini PC. Just wanted to show off my new lighting. But yeah, so yeah, I've got a bunch of them here. I think they're really, really cool. And I think a lot of people are realizing they don't really need more. I was sent a Rembrandt mini PC a year ago that I with Zen 3 Plus, and 12 CUs of RDNA 2, and it could run Harry Potter in 1080p at medium settings, always above 45 frames a second. It was running it better than the Xbox Series S. It was this big, and I think a lot of people are realizing they don't need more than one of these APUs. And there's clearly a lot. It's very easy to implement them into unique systems in a way that it's hard to implement really more complex boards and stuff. The software is there, it just works. So from that perspective, it just makes sense to me that there's a bunch of startups doing stuff with mini PCs. If we're being honest, Dell and HP aren't doing enough. Look at what, and the other OEMs, in my opinion. Look at what Minis Forum is probably going to do if it ever comes out. I think it's supposed to come out actually in a day, right? With the V3 tablet. It's like, where has been these Surface competitors that use AMD APUs? I mean, where are they? Like, it's about time companies notice this gap in the market and start building towards them. With the other OEMs won't do it. So I expect a lot more handhelds and mini PCs to come out because it's clearly not that hard to implement, and this is clearly a gap in the market people want. Um, the Purple Passage, will Celestial be competitive with AMD in the mid range? I don't have any reason to believe it will be. No, if it even comes out at all. Um, let's see what else we got here. When could we get X3D chips on all dies? The closest to maybe even being able to argue that's happening is Zen 6, I guess. But at the end of the day, I think we have to remember that not all apps benefit from all of that cache as much as there are trade-offs. So, like, there's always going to be a cost trade-off and voltage trade-off to throwing cache on top of stuff. And so I don't think we're ever going to see an architecture that always is what we would call X3D. The only way that is if it requires it. And even then, I bet there will be iterations that don't use it, What would be a good budget AM5 build for $1,500? Should you wait for next gen? No, I mean, I think if you're doing a gaming build right now, go to Micro Center, get a 7800 X3D, get those 32 gigabytes of RAM with it for free, get that $50 off coupon for the motherboard, $25 off coupon for submitting a picture of your build. Call it a day now. I don't think wait for Zen 5. If you're worried about doing budget builds, get the deals that are out there now. They're insane. That is what I would recommend. Hey Tom, will AMD at some point focus on their chip design to be more energy efficient than Nvidia? Yeah, they were. RDNA 2 is more efficient than Ampere, generally speaking, besides the 3070, basically. So, will AMD at some point? They did, and they won, and more people bought NVIDIA. So, that's my answer to you. Will AMD at some point focus on chip design to be more efficient than NVIDIA? They have before, and people never give them credit when that happens. And then anytime NVIDIA uses more energy, it's like, well, but it's powerful. But when AMD does it, it's inefficient. So, they're not that far behind NVIDIA at all points right now anyways too. It's just Nvidia uses a more expensive silicon is how I would put it. It's basically the same family of nodes, but hey Tom, I don't usually catch you live due to the time difference. This is Kate Kaito. Your hard work on the content is appreciated. Any news on the PS5 Pro being diskless? Well, I've been talking about that for months before the exclusive leaks. So that would too. I think it makes sense for Sony. Again, it's up to them. They can decide to do whatever they want. But if I was at Sony, I would say you've already made this external disk drive that people can buy separately. I would make that the same disk drive the PS5 Pro and PlayStation 6 uses, because most people buy games digital, but not all of them. So I wouldn't remove the disk drive. I would just say buy it separately for $50 or something. They should lower the price on it though. $70 is milking for sure. Youth in Asia, how descriptive, writes, and it says, how much performance do consoles gain by utilizing APIs that are closer to the metal? Is it worth the cost to back compatibility? Seems like hardware is converging, but APIs are not. I mean, how much of a performance do consoles gain? For first party games, I think they might actually gain a 30 to 50% boost, but it's not like a linear boost. It's not just like, oh, because it's programmed to the metal, the frame rate is now 50% higher. It's just like, the textures and RAM usage is a lot more efficient, and there's maybe like a soft 10 to 20% boost. So like that's what they're getting by doing that. But for third-party games, it's probably less than a 10% boost or 20%. It's easier to manage the memory more efficiently. It's really one of the biggest things with programming to the metal, I think. Let me see here. TMC Paint writes in and says, will Sony ever launch actual PS3 backwards compatibility or just focus on remasters? I think they could do PS3 backwards compatibility right now. TMC Paint. Would it be for every game? No, but Xbox backwards compatibility with Xbox One, it wasn't every game at first. It took years of them improving their emulator and adding support for more games. So TMC pay, and I think if Sony wanted to, they could do backwards compatibility at least to a limited degree right now. And I'm surprised they haven't. I even heard from somebody, one of my best sources that I really do trust, that they've had a working backwards compatibility emulator for PS3 since the PS4. Now the PS4, it was only like half of the games could even run well, but that still tells you something, right? Like if they really wanted it now, I feel like they could do it. I do. And I'm surprised every time um, they haven't done it. Christian Bittner says 360 also wasn't the PS3 architecture, though. Yeah, I know. And the Xbox One wasn't very powerful. But if the Xbox One could run most 360 games backwards compatible, the PS4 could apparently do like a handful of them. And now, if they could do a handful back then, they have something with the CPU so much stronger. I'm sure they could do it right now if they wanted to. I'm sure they could at least do a mostly backwards compatible thing with PS3 if they wanted to. I don't know if they're waiting to make it a feature of the Pro, which would be funny, I guess, or PS6, or if they've just decided enough times past they don't care and they'd rather resell games. I lean towards that being what it is, to be honest. But they could do it right now if they wanted to. I'm gonna leave it at that. It's done with leading edge. Will Global Foundries ever make silicon for current gen CPUs or GPUs anytime in this? No, I mean, at least for the foreseeable future, Global Foundries has relegated itself to making stuff that doesn't need a cutting edge node, at least cutting edge in the way that we consider what they use for high end GPUs and CPUs. And I think they've kind of doomed themselves to being behind forever because they've just let the market get away from them. Yeah, it would have been hard, would have cost a lot of money, but TSMC is in the lead, which means they make more money, which then they take more money to make more foundries, to make more money, to make more foundries, to make more money, to get more money. And it's just a virtuous cycle where global foundries, they're just not going to cut up and make cutting edge stuff for a very long time, if ever again. Once you're behind that much, you're just kind of behind. That's really what it is. All right. Well, I think I'm going to call it a day there because I don't see any other tipped questions coming in. And I think I'm clearly starting to lose my voice and get rambling. So I think we're going to cut it there. But I want to thank everybody for watching this. I hope you enjoyed the new background I have here that has an Intel setting, an Nvidia setting, an AMD setting, and then also a console setting, which I need to get like an N64 up there, but then I'll need to figure out if I want to add another light for Nintendo on that side. We'll have to see about that. I guess I could do that though, but I don't know what. I probably just use red for Nintendo. I'll just use the AMD setting for Nintendo and the Nvidia setting for Xbox anyways. So but yep, I hope you enjoyed the live stream. If you did, make sure you like, subscribe to the Moore's Laws Ed YouTube channel, share. Remember, you can submit questions ahead of time if you join the Moore's Laws Ed Patreon. Those informed questions we had from developers is only possible for the people that joined the Patreon because I had the time to think about my question, ask some of my contacts. Like, if you want those informed questions without having to tip, then join the Moore's Laws Ed Patreon. You also get a new die shrink came out a week ago. We got another die shrink coming out next week. I'm having on a developer who is at GDC as the next guest. You join the Moore's Laws Ed Patreon. Tomorrow you can ask questions of a developer who actually made a lot of games that I like from my past, who was just at GDC, and talk to developers there. So remember, all of that stuff's there for you if you support us there. Click on the links in the description. Subscribe to Broken Silicon and podcast apps. I am tired. I am falling asleep, and I'm clearly rambling. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a good weekend.